The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor of Villa Oleandra, and for a moment nobody in the room moved. Not George Clooney, who was still on one knee with a $10 million ring in his hand, not Angelina Jolie, who had just discovered this entire dinner was a setup, and certainly not Amal Clooney, who had just walked in on her husband proposing to another woman. The security footage from that night in Lake Como would later be worth millions, but it would never see the light of day, locked away in a vault along with the non-disclosure agreements, the payoffs, and the truth about what really happened when Hollywood's most powerful lawyer caught Hollywood's most powerful actor trying to leave her for the world's most famous humanitarian. It had started 3 months earlier, in March 2017. Angelina was still reeling from her divorce from Brad Pitt, the custody battles playing out in public, her reputation being systematically destroyed by Harvey Weinstein's former PR team that Brad had hired. She was at her lowest point, spending most of her time in Cambodia with the children, trying to shield them from the media circus their lives had become. George Clooney had initially reached out as a friend. He and Brad had been close, the Ocean's 11 brotherhood they called it, but George had seen enough during the marriage to know that Brad's public persona hid something darker. The first call was brief, professional, just checking in. The second was longer, more personal. By the third they were talking for hours. What Angelina didn't know was that George had been obsessed with her for years. She was always the one, a former assistant would later reveal. Even when he was with Amal, even at his own wedding, he would watch Angelina at events. It was uncomfortable to witness. The friendship seemed innocent enough at first. George offered his private jet when Angelina needed to travel for UN work. He connected her with his lawyers when Brad's team played dirty. He even offered his Lake Como estate as a retreat for her and the children, away from the paparazzi, who had made their lives unbearable. But here's what nobody expected to happen next. In May 2017, George invited Angelina to Como for what he described as a strategy meeting about her humanitarian work. He said Amal would be there, that her expertise in international law would be invaluable for Angelina's UN initiatives. It was a lie so elaborate, so carefully constructed, that even George's own staff didn't realize what was happening until it was too late. George had sent Amal to The Hague on a fabricated emergency case. He had dismissed most of the staff, keeping only a skeleton crew who signed additional NDAs. He had prepared a 5-course dinner, hired a string quartet, and somehow acquired a ring that had once belonged to Princess Diana, a piece that was supposed to be in a private collection, untouchable, priceless. The most shocking part was yet to come. Angelina arrived at Como expecting a business meeting. She found George in a custom Armani tuxedo, the villa transformed into something from a fairy tale. Candles everywhere, white roses, her favorite, covering every surface. The string quartet playing The Way You Look Tonight, which George had discovered was the song her mother used to sing to her. "George, what is this?" Angelina asked, though the sinking feeling in her stomach already knew. "This is me telling you the truth," George said, and his hands were shaking. George Clooney, who had faced down war criminals in court, whose hands never shook. "I'm in love with you, Angelina. I have been since the moment I saw you on the set of The Good Shepherd. 10 years I've been in love with you." Angelina stepped backward, her mind racing. "George, you're married. You have children." "I made a mistake," George said, and the words came tumbling out like he'd rehearsed them 1,000 times. "Amal was. She was safe. She was the kind of woman everyone expected me to marry. Brilliant, accomplished, appropriate, but she was never you. This was the moment that changed everything. I'm leaving her," George continued, pulling out the ring box. "I've already spoken to my lawyers. It's done, Angelina. I'm free to be with you, to be the father your children need, to be the partner you deserve. Brad never deserved you. He never understood what he had." He dropped to one knee, and Angelina felt the room spin. This was George Clooney, humanitarian, activist, the man everyone considered Hollywood's last gentleman, revealing himself to be just another narcissist who thought he could reorganize the world to suit his desires. "George, please stand up," Angelina said, her voice steady despite her shock. "This is inappropriate. This is wrong." "Love isn't wrong," George insisted, still on his knee. "What's wrong is denying what we both feel." "I know you feel it too, Angelina. All those conversations, all those moments, were friendship," Angelina interrupted. "I trusted you. I thought you were being kind during the worst period of my life, but George wasn't listening." He opened the ring box and even Angelina gasped. The ring was extraordinary, a 15-carat cashmere sapphire surrounded by diamonds worth more than most people's homes. But it was what the ring represented that made her feel sick. "This ring," George said, "belonged to Princess Diana. I know how much you admired her humanitarian work. I thought, The sound of the door slamming open cut him off mid-sentence. "Wait until you hear what happened next." Amal Clooney stood in the doorway, and the expression on her face was something beyond fury. It was the look of a woman who had just had every suspicion confirmed in the worst possible way. She wasn't supposed to be there. She was supposed to be in The Hague, arguing a case that didn't exist, carefully removed from the scene by her own husband. "The case was mysteriously cancelled," Amal said, her voice deadly quiet. "Imagine my surprise when I called the ICC and they had no idea what I was talking about." George was still on his knee, frozen in a tableau of humiliation. The ring box dropped from his hand, the priceless jewel rolling across the marble floor. The string quartet had stopped playing, the musicians trying to disappear into the walls. "Amal," George started to stand, but his wife held up her hand. "No, stay on your knee, it's where you belong." She turned to Angelina. "And you, I actually defended you, did you know that? When people said you were a homewrecker, I said no, that was just tabloid nonsense. But here's the twist nobody saw coming. I'm not here for him," Angelina said, her voice stronger now. "I didn't know about any of this. I came here for a business meeting about refugee law." Amal laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Oh, I know exactly why you're here. I've been watching him plan this for 3 months. 3 months of secret phone calls, private jet arrangements, flower orders from Switzerland. Did you know he hired someone to learn your mother's recipes? He was going to cook them for you, to remind you of her." The invasion of privacy, the manipulation, the depth of George's deception, it all hit Angelina at once. This wasn't love, it was obsession, carefully orchestrated and deeply disturbing. "You monitored his communications?" George accused, finally standing. "I'm a human rights lawyer," Amal shot back. "When my husband starts acting like one of the war criminals I prosecute, yes, I pay attention." The confrontation that followed would become legend in Hollywood. "How dare you?" George said, but Amal cut him off. "How dare I? You fabricated an international legal case to get me out of the country. That's not just divorce material, George, that's criminal. Fraud, conspiracy, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Should I continue?" She pulled out her phone and George's face went white. "You recorded everything," Amal confirmed. "Every conversation where you called me a trophy wife, every time you said marrying me was a career move, every pathetic declaration about how Angelina was your true love, but the most devastating revelation was still to come." "Show her the text, George," Amal said. "Show her the messages you've been sending to Brad Pitt." Angelina's head snapped toward George. "What messages?" George's silence was damning, so Amal continued. "My husband has been feeding your ex-husband information about you, your whereabouts, your emotional state, anything that might help Brad in the custody battle. All so you would need George's support, so you would become dependent on him." The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that Angelina actually had to sit down. The man she thought was helping her had been sabotaging her, creating the very problems he then offered to solve. "You're sick," Angelina said to George, and her voice was filled with a mixture of disgust and pity. "You're actually sick. I did it for us," George insisted, and even now, even exposed, he couldn't see how twisted his logic had become. "Brad didn't deserve you. I was just destroying my life so you could play savior," Angelina finished. "You were traumatizing my children to create an opening for yourself." Here's where the story gets even more shocking. Amal pulled out a folder from her bag. She had come prepared. "These are the real documents from your UN meeting tomorrow. The one George told you was cancelled." She handed them to Angelina. "He was going to keep you here for 3 days, isolated, working on you." The scope of the plan was breathtaking. George had arranged for fake news about a security threat at the UN to keep Angelina at Como. He had her children's passports flagged to prevent them from traveling. He had even paid off several journalists to run stories about Angelina having a breakdown if she rejected him, stories that were ready to publish with one phone call. "You were going to destroy me if I said no?" Angelina asked, though it wasn't really a question. "I would never," George started, but Amal laughed bitterly. "Show her your phone, George. Show her the draft emails to Harvey Weinstein's old publicity team, the ones offering them $2 million to handle Angelina if things went badly." The room went silent. Even the staff members who were trying to remain invisible gasped. George Clooney, the man who had publicly supported Me Too, who had denounced Weinstein, was ready to use the same tactics against a woman who rejected him. But Angelina Jolie was not a woman who broke easily. She stood up, walked over to George and looked him directly in the eyes. "You want to know the saddest part? I actually thought you were one of the good ones. I thought in all of Hollywood's cesspool of ego and manipulation, you were someone with actual integrity." She picked up the ring from where it had rolled, examining it with the eye of someone who had worn millions in jewels. Princess Diana's ring? She stood for authenticity, for using privilege to help others, for protecting her children above all else. The fact that you thought you could use her memory to manipulate me shows how little you understand about either of us." What happened next stunned everyone in the room. Angelina threw the ring into the lake. $10 million, a piece of history, gone in a splash that echoed across the water. George actually cried out, starting toward the door as if he could somehow retrieve it. "That's the difference between us," Angelina said. "You see value in things. I see value in truth." She turned to Amal. "I'm sorry you're married to him. I'm sorry you're going through this. But I want you to know, I never encouraged this. I never wanted this. I thought he was my friend." Amal studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "I know. I've seen all the communications. You never said anything that could be construed as romantic interest. This is all him." But the drama wasn't over yet. George, realizing his perfect plan had collapsed, tried one last manipulation. "If you walk out of here, Angelina, I'll make sure you never work in Hollywood again. I'll make sure the custody battle goes Brad's way. I have that power and you know it." Amal pulled out her phone and hit record. "Say that again, George. Please." Threatening and blackmail will go wonderfully with the fraud charges. But Angelina didn't need Amal's protection. She walked up to George, close enough that he could smell her perfume, close enough that for a moment he thought she might be reconsidering. "You could take everything from me," she said softly. "My career, my money, even my children. And I would still rather be alone forever than spend 1 minute with a man who thinks love is something you can steal through manipulation and lies." She stepped back, and her voice grew stronger. "But you won't do any of those things. Because if you do, I'll hold a press conference and tell the world exactly what happened here tonight. Every detail, every text, every betrayal. Your liberal humanitarian image that you've spent decades building, gone in minutes." The threat landed perfectly. George's entire identity was built on being Hollywood's good guy, the activist, the humanitarian. Exposure would destroy not just his marriage, but his entire legacy. "Now," Angelina continued, "you're going to do several things. First, you're going to stop all contact with Brad's legal team. Second, you're going to write a letter to the custody judge recanting any negative statements you've made about me. Third, you're going to donate $50 million to the UN Refugee Agency, anonymously. Consider it payment for your attempt to use humanitarian work as a seduction tool." $50 million. George started to protest, but Amal interrupted. "That's less than what the divorce will cost you. I'd take the deal." George looked between the two women, his wife, brilliant and cold, holding all the evidence of his sins, and Angelina, dignified and untouchable, the woman he'd destroyed himself trying to possess. He nodded, defeated. "I'll need that in writing," Amal said, already pulling out legal documents. "Tonight." As George signed papers that would cost him millions and destroy any leverage he thought he had, Angelina gathered her things to leave. But before she walked out, she had one more thing to say. "You know what the real tragedy is, George? We could have been actual friends. We could have done incredible humanitarian work together. But you had to turn it into this sick game of possession. You're no different from Harvey Weinstein or any of the other predators. You just hide it better behind charity galas and political speeches." The comparison to Weinstein, that was the knife twist that finally broke George's composure. He slumped in his chair, looking every one of his 56 years and more. But wait, there's an even more shocking epilogue to this story. As Angelina was leaving, Amal followed her out. By the lake, away from George and the staff, the two women stood in the moonlight. "I knew," Amal said quietly. "I've known for months what he was planning." Angelina turned, surprised. "Then why?" "Because I needed him to actually do it. Attempted emotional affair isn't grounds for what I need. But this, fraud, conspiracy, attempted blackmail, this gives me everything. The children, the money, the properties, and most importantly, the silence. He'll never be able to tell his version of events." The calculation was cold, brilliant, and utterly devastating. Amal had used Angelina as bait to catch her husband in an unforgivable act. "I'm sorry you were involved," Amal continued, "but I knew you were strong enough to handle it, and I knew you would never actually accept him." "How could you be sure?" Angelina asked. "Because I've studied you," Amal admitted. "The real you, not the tabloid version. You don't fall for powerful men, you become powerful yourself." George could never understand that. He thought you needed saving. He couldn't see that you've been saving yourself all along. The two women stood in silence for a moment, both victims and victors in different ways. "What will you do now?" "Then use his money to fund the causes he pretended to care about." Amal smiled, but it was sharp, dangerous. "What about you?" "Go back to my children, focus on my work, pretend this never happened." "Can you do that?" "Pretend?" Angelina looked back at the villa, where George was probably still sitting, surrounded by the wreckage of his plans. "I've pretended men like him were friends for years. One more act won't kill me." As Angelina's car pulled away from Villa Oleandra, she didn't look back, but if she had, she would have seen Amal standing by the lake, papers in hand, finally holding all the power in a marriage where she'd been treated as an accessory. The divorce announcement came 6 months later. Irreconcilable differences, the statement read. No details, no drama, just a clean break that gave Amal everything, and George his silence. He kept his reputation, mostly, though whispers followed him. Why had Amal, who had stood by him through everything, suddenly left? What had happened at Como that night in June? Angelina never spoke of it. The NDAs were comprehensive, the payoff substantial, and besides, she had bigger battles to fight. The custody case with Brad, her humanitarian work, her films. She didn't have time to dwell on one more Hollywood man who had confused obsession with love. But years later, at a UN gala in Geneva, Angelina and Amal found themselves at the same table. George wasn't there. He rarely attended such events anymore. His humanitarian credentials somehow tarnished, though no one could say exactly why. The ring was never recovered, Amal mentioned casually over champagne. They sent divers, spent hundreds of thousands searching. Nothing. Good, Angelina replied. Some things should stay buried. He still asks about you, Amal added. Not directly, but he monitors your career, your life. The obsession never really ended. That's his burden to carry, not mine. Amal raised her glass. To women who refuse to be possessed, Angelina clinked her glass against Amal's, and to women who know how to turn the tables. The truth about that night at Lake Como never made the tabloids. There were rumors, of course, there always are in Hollywood. Some said George had made a pass at Angelina and been rejected. Others claimed Amal had caught them in an affair. A few even suggested it was all a publicity stunt gone wrong. But the real story, the proposal, the betrayal, the threats, the $50 million payoff, remained locked away in legal documents and the memories of those who were there. George never made another romantic gesture toward anyone. Amal never remarried, too busy building an empire with her ex-husband's money. And Angelina continued to be Angelina, unbreakable, untouchable, unbought. The villa at Lake Como was quietly sold a year later. The new owners, a tech billionaire and his wife, found it curious that the previous owner had filled in the lake-facing section, creating a garden where water once lapped at the shore. They never knew it was George's desperate attempt to find a ring that had become a symbol of everything wrong with how powerful men see love, as something to be bought, stolen, or manipulated into existence. But somewhere at the bottom of Lake Como, Princess Diana's ring lies in the silt and shadows, a $10 million reminder that some women cannot be bought, some hearts cannot be stolen, and some spirits cannot be broken, no matter how powerful the man who tries. And in Hollywood, where everything is for sale, that might be the most valuable lesson of all.